Thank you, ma'am. Good morning, everybody, and thank you very much for this opportunity to share a few insights around web application security and get you started on this subject. So I do see a lot of participants. Thank you very much for joining. And especially if you have any questions during our conversation, feel free to use the chat window. I do have it open here so that I can just read it through and address any of your questions, or if you need to ask also, that's fine. So we'll quickly get into this subject of web application security. So I do understand you folks are interested in security, and when it comes to the word security in our computer world, it does mean a lot of things. It ranges from infrastructure security, network security, data security, web application security, and so on. So is it right to say that, oh, security is such broad, we cannot contain it at all? It's true that security is very broad, but we do have professional organizations like CISSP who have framed this and contained the entire security portfolio into a very well-structured form. So we'll just see how the industry treats this whole subject of security from a structured form. So it's easy to say that, hey, security is so vast, but is it okay to just leave it in such a way? No, definitely not. So CISSP is a professional organization under ISC, which runs the certification, security certification by the name CISSP. So they have defined security in this 8 umbrellas. So if you refer any books around CISSP, which is like approximately 2 to 3 years old, you will find that security has been divided into 10 areas. However, with the recent update, they compressed, they kind of shuffled it to 8 areas. So whatever you see on the screen right now, the whole umbrella of security in our computer world, they have categorized it as these things like security and risk management, asset security, security engineering itself, communication and network security, IDAM, which is identity and access management, then security assessment and testing, then comes security operations, software development security. So before we move into something, I'll very quickly touch base on what everything does. So to run an organization, or to run NITT or any professional organization today, we need to take care of the security aspect from a holistic way. We cannot say, hey, I will secure my perimeter very well, but I will not take care of my application. Neither you cannot say, I will take care of my application very well, but I will not follow data security concepts. So if somebody is going to have a question in your mind, hey, you are showing so many things, out of all these things, which one is really important? Everything is equally important. So if you have some questions in your mind, hey, I'm very much interested in something else. I'm very much interested in, say, cryptography or network security. Yes, that also is very much important. It's very important, and it will cut across one of these portfolios. However, for today's discussion, we will pick 2 of the most common things, and I'll explain why these are so common and why it's so relevant for our day-to-day lives and how you can get involved actually. As ma'am pointed out, I mean, the crux is you can make money. I mean, if you study point 6 and point 8, you can just make money. The second question you might have, hey, you speak so much, did you make money? Yes, I did make money. I mean, you report a vulnerability, if it is valid, they just end up paying you in lakhs, and because you uncovered a vulnerability. So is that doable? Very much doable. That's what we are going to look at today. So quickly looking at the first one, security and risk management. So we are aware that there are something known as a cyber laws. So when it comes to security, there is something known as a cyber law also. Does that play a part? Is that important? It's very much important. Especially today, of course, you might have read in the news, of late, in the recent past, in the last 20 days, the government of India did ban few applications. One of the infamous applications is TikTok. Why did they ban it? They said it is not in accordance to the law. It's not following the cyber laws kind of thing, wherein it had some friction around cyber laws. Like it was tracking something which it should, I don't know whether it's true or not, but that was the claim. Did somebody have a question?
Joe.
Okay, so that piece is falling under a portfolio by name compliance, laws, regulation. So there are some professional courses for that as well. Next thing is asset security. The very fact that everybody has a computer, a laptop, that itself need to be secured. You might say, yeah, I have it with me. So what we mean by asset security is the data secured? So you might say, hey, yes, I do have a login password. Tomorrow if my laptop is stolen, nothing happens. No, something does happen. If your laptop is stolen, all they'll do is remove your hard disk, put it in another, probably a bare metal frame, and they'll be able to access data. So asset security also plays a very important role when it comes to security. So we do have our latest editions of technologies wherein it will encrypt your local hard disk data at rest. So even if they unplug your hard disk and put it somewhere else, they'll not be able to access data from it because the data at rest in your hard disk will be encrypted. Remember, when you have a Windows password, it is just a login password. It does not mean that the data at rest sitting in your hard disk is encrypted. So of late, there are technologies which take care of this issue as well. So every time when you log in, everything gets unencrypted. When you log off, everything gets encrypted. So if your asset, which is your laptop, if that gets stolen as well, that will be taken care of. Is that important under the umbrella of security? Very much required, asset security. Then comes security engineering. This is very broad and it's kind of management of security where in organizations, how they architect and engineer their entire security portfolio because they have network security, many things meeting. It's more of the management side of security. So that places like management of information security. Next thing comes communication and network security. This you folks might be very much aware of. In schools, in colleges, they do teach this network security, how secure network should be designed. There should be firewalls in place, network firewalls in place. For example, a very simplest example would be one of my classmate. He runs a company. So suddenly he rang me last week saying, hey, you know, my website is getting bombarded and the site is down, which simply means his network was not strong and somebody took his site down. He was running a small e-commerce website. So his website went down. So basically there was no proper firewall rules in place because of which somebody was able to send millions of requests, which is one of the most infamous vulnerability, which you folks might have heard, a denial of service vulnerability. So if the network is not configured in a way to handle all those things, the network goes down. Ultimately, the application itself goes down. So is network security important? Very much it's important under the portfolio of complete cybersecurity. Next comes IDAM. IDAM is something known as identity and access management. So this is kind of often seen in big organizations like say Infosys, Wipro, CTS, TCS, whatever company you name, every company will have this portfolio of IDAM. Probably not all colleges or universities will have this security portfolio of IDAM, but it does play a very key role. To explain it in very simple terms, say there's an employee in an organization, he works for the company and he quits the company on a day. So when he steps out, how does his badge automatically get revoked? Until that day, he would have used his badge to swipe a door and enter so many rooms in his company. So the moment he leaves, his access needs to be revoked. Or within the company, few people should not be able to access certain areas. How that is handled, how that is configured. Everything comes under IDAM, identity, who the person is, identity and access management. That plays a very key portfolio in large corporations, in very big companies. IDAM is a key stuff. Is that important? Very much important. Nobody should have unauthorized access via this IDAM system setup. So that's very much important. The other thing, next thing is one of the key part, which is security assessment and training. This involves designing, performing and analyzing security testing. What do we do in majority of the companies? You name any company in India or elsewhere abroad, every company today develops something. Say a classical example would be Amazon.in, where you buy stuffs, or Flipkart, or any company or any website. What do they have as an end product? They have an application. For the most part, that application is a web application. Let's say banks, you have a SBI bank. Probably you paid some college fees using a bank flow, wherein SB Collect or something. So everything is a product, which is a software, a web application, which is developed. So this web application, once it's developed, the companies cannot just say, okay, I've completed my development process. which is application building process, I will just go live. Go live as in, I'll just make it available for my consumers. No, that's a big no when it comes to a corporate setup. That piece of software needs to be security tested. Can a bad actor do something on that software? That's what exactly we are going to talk about. That's what exactly deals with web application security. Next comes security operations. So this, every big company, this also for the most part, colleges, universities will not have something known as a GSOC or a SOC. They call it Security Operations Center or Security Command Center. Big companies will have it so that they will run something known as a Security Operations Center. So they'll have a 24/7 operation setup, and somebody from the organization security team, let it be Microsoft or let it be IBM or any company, somebody will be there in that security operations center always. So say if there is a security impact on their infrastructure or their application, they will constantly be monitoring logs, and they'll constantly be monitoring for alerts and signals which they'll receive, which will indicate that, hey, you know, something bad has happened to our network. Somebody is trying to break into our network. Somebody is trying to hack into our application. Somebody is trying to do something bad. There will be a security operations team which will constantly monitor all these things. And as security researchers, when we find security vulnerabilities in a legitimate way, in a good faith way, as a white hat person, when I say white hat, it simply means a person who's trying to find security holes, security vulnerabilities on a system for good reasons to get it fixed so that a bad actor will not exploit. He is termed as a white hat guy. So if somebody say, we as the researchers, if we are going to find a vulnerability, we'll reach out to this team, the CSIRT team, the security operations team. CSIRT means computer incident response team. So they have different names for this. So everything comes under the portfolio of security operation. Next comes software development security. The 6th and 8th are very closely related. What did we see in 6? If we have a piece of software developed, before that software is put to use, which means before that software is open to general public, that needs to be tested for security. That is one piece. But however, there is another piece to it. I always feel 8 should be 6 and 6 should be 8. Anyways, so there is another piece to it, which means while the software was being developed itself, at every phase of the software development, there should be security concepts and security principles baked into the development process itself so that the software is developed in a very secure way, which means once the software is developed, a security assessment team will not be able to find any loopholes or vulnerabilities. So 6 and 8, they both are very much interlinked. Software development security and security assessment, very much interlinked. Those are the two subjects which we'll touch base. As ma'am mentioned, there are 11 tools. We'll at least cover one tool which is very relevant to this, which would be a tool by name Burp Suite. You can just type in chat if you folks have heard that tool or use that tool, like the tool by name Burp Suite. And the other thing is Wireshark. It does touch with security, but that's pretty general, and you might not play a lot with that. We'll try to cover Burp Suite end to end today for the most part. So security, it's very vast. When it comes to cyber security, super vast. We can't keep saying, hey, you know, security is very vast. There are professional institutions, CISSP and so on, who have structured it in this way. And if you see from a very practical perspective, from an organization's perspective, these 8 portfolios kind of covers everything. It covers any and everything, which we call it as vast in the realm of security. So we'll just touch base on 6 and 8, and we'll see what you folks can do, just not during this half an hour or 1 hour session, but the core aim is to get you started. You'll be, oh, something like this exists. Can I also play around? As ma'am pointed out, can I go back and do something about this? So this is all about like trying to get you started, and you can build from there on. So this is something which I personally, so if you ask me, hey, did you work in all these? No, definitely not. I'm more into 6 and 8. I work in a couple of companies here, including consulting companies like PricewaterhouseCoopers, where we were extensively involved in number 6, and I deal with 6 and 8 for the most part. So we'll go ahead and jump into this. So we spoke so much. So I'll just stop for a second. If you have any questions, Just ping in chat saying, hey, I have a question. I want to unmute and raise it, or you can click that hand icon, raise your hand, or whatever way you want to communicate, you can do it. But the best part would be just posting your question in the meeting chat, because I do have it constantly open in front of me. If there is a question, I would be more than happy to answer it if I know the answer. If not, I'll give my best to get back to you folks. So any questions, feel free to message in the chat window at any point in time. If not, we'll just keep moving. So how does this whole application security thing work? So remember, in security, yes, there are many things, but we are going to talk about application security, in specifically web application security. So we'll see what is the difference between this application security and web application security. For the most part, they're closely related. It deals with something known as a web application and a thick client application. In today's world, even a thick client application does involve web concepts. Everybody has gone into that web world. I don't see any application like a thick client standalone application. So you might ask, hey, what is this thick client? Thick client is a native application, like a Windows application. A simple example would be your Windows calculator. So that's a thick client application. It just runs on your machine, on your laptop. It does not interact with the web at all. However, there are other hybrid applications today which are thick client application, but under the hood, they are actually web applications. They do interact with the HTTP protocol, and they do something around the web. A classical example would be Adobe. The Adobe Acrobat Reader, which you see today, few days back, not few days, few years back, it was a pure standalone thick client application, wherein you download, you install, you use it, done. However, today, if you see the same Adobe, you download, you install, you can't use it. Within that thick client application itself, you will have a login screen. You will go and log in. You will go and purchase an account, a subscription, and you will log in into that specific piece of software. So though it's a thick client application, it does interact with the web using the HTTP protocol, and it does some work. So gone are those days where thick client were purely thick client. Now they do deal with web also. So typically when we say a web application, anything and everything which you open in a web browser contributes for a web application. Classical example, any website, a State Bank of India application, SBI.co.in itself is a web application. IRCTC is a web application. Anything and everything which you see and render on a web browser is a web application by itself. So when it comes to web application security, how does it really work? So the image you see here is a very simplified representation. So say, for example, you can forget the word SQL injection for now. So we did see a lot of things in the previous slide wherein what are the types of security. We have network security and everything. Say there is a web application, bank.com. Let's not take any bank's name now. It's just bank.com. So they have a web application running. So this bank has a very good network security setup. Say, for example, they have a very strong firewall with a very good firewall policy, and they have IDS and IPS, which you folks might be familiar of, like intrusion detection system and intrusion prevention systems. They have very good network security controls in place, and they are running bank.com. Of course, a bank website will have a database server which stores all your details and my details. For example, your bank balance and so on, whatnot. It stores so many things. Say they have very strong network security controls in place. However, the web application bank.com is rendering a web application. If that is vulnerable for a vulnerability, a web application vulnerability by name SQL injection, what happens then? Somebody, though all network security controls are in place, he'll be able to query the backend database and retrieve sensitive details from the bank's database. Can a network security control prevent this? What would be the answer? Any guesses? Can a network security control help here? The answer would be no, because he's exploiting on the web application layer. So if you are familiar, I believe most of you folks might be familiar with the whole OSI model, wherein we learn those 7 layers, like application layer, like that whole stack in that, the topmost is L7 application layer. We do have transport layer, network layer, everything on the lower stacks. So everything the web application deals with is on the application layer. If there is a security vulnerability, the attacker will deal with the application layer. Everything underneath is still strong. The network layer is still strong. The transport layer is still strong. However, just by exploiting vulnerabilities, application layer vulnerabilities, he will be able to just bypass all transport layer and network layer security concepts, which deals with web app, which deals with a network security firewall and so on. So typically, what should the bank.com do here? They should take care of their application also. In essence, they should be like, okay, I have a strong network security control in place. I need to take care of my web application also. So this whole thing of web application, they just use this term AppSec in an industry world, and in academic world they use this term AppSec, web AppSec. So who can deal with this? Like, I mean, you might say like, what should I need for this? What are the basic requirements for this so that I can get into this game? If you are interested in, having this said, like you might be interested in network security, you might be interested in IDAM or anything, that still is a very good portfolio. But for our discussion, we are dealing with web app. So when it comes to a web application security, who can perform a web application security testing? The number 6, which we saw earlier. Who can talk about or deal with software development security? What are the basic requirements for that? It's very, very simple. That's the fantastic part. As ma'am was rightly pointing out, these days, nobody is waiting to complete their college. Gone are those days where somebody completes their bachelor's degree or master's degree, learn something, and then they put it into practice. No, gone are those days. K-12 students, like school students, they learn these concepts. It's fairly easy. Then they start doing these work, they start reporting vulnerabilities, and they build a very good profile for themselves so that they get a very good job and they make money while they explore the world of web application security. All they need is a very basic understanding of the HTTP protocol. So what is this HTTP protocol? It's very simple. What do you type on your website? HTTPS something, which means you are consuming the HTTP protocol. However, the HTTP protocol itself, if you explore, has many minute things: a GET request, a POST request. Those we call it as HTTP verbs: a GET, a POST, a PUT, a delete. You might be very familiar with that. So what is a HTTP request itself? We'll see all those practically when we see Burp Suite. There are headers, there is body, there is cookies, there are what does a header do, what does a HTTP body do, what does this cookie do. If you get a fair understanding of the overall HTTP protocol itself, then that's it. You can kick off web application security. You can start probing, you can start exploring. However, the real thing that is required to get the job done for this is curiosity. Curiosity is one of the key things. So, in this, because what you will just learn everything, you will just see, oh, SBI.com. What happens? This is the HTTP traffic which flows through. This is what I see. If you don't have curiosity, there is practically nothing much you can do about that. So, in my experience, I would say having these two, somebody can get started doing web application security. So, couple of basics we'll cover instead of just saying, hey, you need to get started, you need to get started. What is this HTTP whole thing? The basics. What is this whole HTTP stuff? The fundamental principle, the underlying thing of this is parameters, form fields, cookies, HTTP headers. So what do we call as a parameter? A parameter is anything which you submit as, say, for example, if you submit in a form, in a web form, in a Gmail form, you submit name equal to your name. You put your name equal to Sam, which simply means that the parameter is a form field, and the value and the form field together refers as the parameter, and the form field is name itself, that input text. So if you understand form fields and parameters, which is very straightforward, which we will see now, we'll just take a web page and see how these things work. That would get you started. Next, you got to have a very good understanding of cookies, which you might be familiar with today. Whichever website you beside it says accept cookies. What is this cookie? Cookie is a part of the whole HTTP protocol itself. So it is a part of the HTTP header. So what this cookie is, how it works, how it does, you should have a fair understanding. Cookies have something known as flags, secure flags, and so on. You need a fair understanding of cookies. Next comes HTTP headers. You need to understand what HTTP header is, what are the values which are being passed in HTTP headers. If you have a basic fundamental idea about all this, just cookies, HTTP headers, form fields, then you will understand when you click a button in your web browser. Say, for example, when I say web browser, the application which loads in the web browser. A classical example would be, you will understand when you click transfer money on your SBI bank, underneath what happens. What is the request that goes and what happens underneath? That you will understand. Once you understand that, if I click a button, if I click a radio button, if I navigate to a web page, what happens underneath? Basically, a bunch of parameters are exchanged, form fields are exchanged, cookies are being validated, and there are some header information. If you understand that, yes, you can get started. So once you get a hold of that, you can uncover many vulnerabilities, including SQL injection, cross-site scripting, error handling, and so on. So I want to just take 1 minute and explain what these vulnerabilities mean so that it's clear. It's a very vast subject. When it comes to web application vulnerabilities, as they point, security is vast, security is vast. Very, very true. Web application vulnerability is also very vast. What is a vulnerability basically? What can be a web application vulnerability? If anybody wants to say or message or chat or talk, you can definitely. What can be a web application vulnerability? So when you use a web application, if you are able to do anything which the application is not supposed to do, which can in turn affect somebody, it can be another user who is termed as a victim, then it's a web application vulnerability. Then it's deemed as a web application vulnerability. No, it does not mean that it should affect another user of that application. On the other hand, if it affects the web application provider itself, if it affects IRCTC itself, if it affects SBI or ICICI, the provider itself, then also it's a web application vulnerability. Anything which you are able to do, which the system is not supposed to do. Say, for example, one of the vulnerability which I got a chance to work, I'll say I send you an email today. I send you an email and you open that email. I just send, hey, hi, how are you? You open that email and you read that email and you just close it, done. Next, if I had planted something on that email, and the very fact that you opened that email and just read it and closed it, next time on that session, if you are composing any email or if you are replying to some other email, what if I'm remotely capturing all that email content? You can ask, hey, does that happen? Yes, very much it can happen. Did it happen? Yes, it did happen. So that vulnerability allowed me to exploit it in a way wherein send an email to somebody, they open it, I planted something in that email that got executed. What happened? If that user was typing some other email or replying to some other email, I was able to remotely capture all those content. So that was a web application vulnerability which affected not the service provider, but it did affect another user of that service. So that is also a vulnerability. On the other hand, if you are directly bringing a website down, or if you are stealing from a database, it does affect the service provider itself. That also is a vulnerability. So that's an organization by name OWASP, which you folks might be familiar with. Like how CISSP helped and contributed in the world of security to structure the whole security framework. A minute back, I just let you know that, hey, web application vulnerability also very vast, blah, blah. It's so vast and you gotta do many things. No. There is a project by name OWASP, Open Web Application Security Project. They have kind of structured this whole web application vulnerability space. So if you read their entire OWASP guide, which is a free resource, which is a very huge PDF, they have some 200, 300 kinds of vulnerabilities. However, Is it okay to say, hey, web app is vast, vast, vast? No, they have put it in a very nice structure saying, hey, these are the top 10 vulnerabilities which gets exploited over again and again over the years. So if you take care of these things, it is good. Fairly, your application can be secure. So it does not mean these are the only vulnerabilities, but these are kind of the top 10 vulnerabilities. So if you have an understanding of the overall web application space and get to know what these vulnerabilities are, in this session, quickly next we'll go through at least 2 to 3 or 4 of these vulnerabilities to start with knowing what the vulnerability is so that you can explore thereafter. So if you have a good grip on HTTP, all the what cookies means and everything, have a bit of curiosity, and then have a fair understanding of what these top 10 vulnerabilities are. And with the help of the tools which we will demonstrate in this session, you can get started. You can go hunting for vulnerabilities. So let's see. So when they say A1 to A10, it's basically they have ranked it in an order which says, hey, this is the top vulnerability which got exploited again and again over the period of years. So we gave it number 1. Second one, again, the same thing, and so on. So we'll try to touch base on some vulnerability which you can identify in future. At least we'll pick SQL A1 to have a good mix. We'll pick SQL injection A1, which is injection itself, A3, XSS, CSR. I'll just touch base in 2 minutes, the whole thing. Then we'll look in detail at least 2 or 3 or 4 of these things. What is the first one? Injection. If there is a parameter or if there is a HTTP request, if you are able to, as an end user, if you are able to inject some statements, if you are able to inject some code onto that HTTP request and make it execute as a part of the application itself, you are allowed to submit name equal to Sam or name equal to Singh, but you are not allowed to execute the query itself which controls that parameter, which we will see actually. If you are able to submit a code as a part of the value, and if that value becomes a part of the code when it gets executed, then it is an injection vulnerability. This is a very, very nasty vulnerability, which when exploited gives room for a lot of bad things. So that's basically injection. What is broken authentication in session management? Session, everything today, whatever you log in is a session. You might have seen when you log into your bank application, after a few minutes, it will say your session has expired. If there is any problem with that session management itself, then it contributes for a broken authentication and session management issue. The third one, A3 XSS, is a very infamous vulnerability, which is known as a cross-site scripting. There are various types of cross-site scripting, which we will see in this as well, which is also a very common vulnerability. Here, it is targeted towards the other users, a cross-site scripting vulnerability. We will see that in detail. What is IDOR? This they term as IDOR, IDOR, Insecure Direct Object Reference. This is also a class of vulnerability wherein it affects another user. A simple classical example can be, you have Facebook account. You go edit your Facebook profile. When you click edit Facebook, it will say facebook.com, question mark, it will say profile ID equal to and a huge number. In this, if you see, that number is the object. What if you put my number and if you are able to edit? Then it contributes for a IDOR, Insecure Direct Object Reference. Pretty straightforward. A5 is security misconfiguration, which again deals with if you set up a web server, if you have not locked down your files properly, say if you upload something, say there is a job application website, say any college is opening a job application website. Everybody is uploading their photo and their profile as a part of their application process. What if some user is able to view everybody's profile and who uploaded their resumes to that website? If the configuration in that web server is not correct, it will give room for a vulnerability known as directory listing, and that will give room for a bad actor to access everybody's resume which was uploaded on that website. So that is basically security misconfiguration. Sensitive data exposure is pretty straightforward as the English term reads. If anything sensitive is exposed outside, it can be stack traces, it can be pieces of internal information which gets exposed outside in the web application. It's a bad thing. Functional level access control is yet another OWASP classification. What they mean here is, say in a college setup, in NITT setup, we have staffs and students. A staff can enter a web page where you mark attendance. A student should not be able to enter that page. That's basically a function level classification, staff student. That access control should be enforced code-wise. Say it should not be a case wherein an example can be, say a staff can access edit attendance and the student does not see that option edit attendance at all because he's not allowed to. It should not be a case wherein after the staff clicks edit attendance, a page opens. If a student gets access to that URL, he should not be able to access that still, though he gets access to that URL. That is functional level access control. Same thing applies for HR, employee, staff, student, and everything. So when you or anybody design a web application, all these functional level controls should be baked into the code itself, to the application itself. The next is CSR, cross-site request forgery. I'll park it for now because we will see it in detail. Next, using component with known vulnerabilities, which simply means you are running a piece of software. Say example, Microsoft Teams version X, say version 5. Say some security researcher found a vulnerability on, I'm just giving an example, this is not in reality, on version 5 of Teams, and you are still using it. What happens? You are using a component with a known vulnerability. Somebody will attack you. So that also should not be in the picture. The last thing is very minor, but still they have classified it here because it can give very bad results. Unvalidated redirects and forwards. So for example, I send you a link. This can be extensively exploited for phishing. I send you a link which legitimately reads www.google.com/something something. I say, hey, this is a URL. Make sure it's from Google. Please copy and paste and visit this link. What if after you copy that link and paste it and enter it, the original google.com redirected you to some other website controlled by the attacker? That's unvalidated redirects and forwards. These are like on a very high level I'm giving, but let's check at least 2 to 3 so that considering time, we'll be able to see a tool as well. So what is SQL injection? Very, very straightforward. Say there is whatever you see on my screen, there is a user ID and a password field. Here, as we explained when we went through that list, user ID Srinivas is the value. It's not the code itself, it's the value which is entered. Password, my password, is the actual value which got entered. Say, for example, when this is entered, the application will take those values, Srinivas and my password, and put it in a SQL query and execute, which means it will check against the database whether for Srinivas, the password, my password, is the appropriate password. If correct, the code is going to return. What if the web application is vulnerable for, what happens if the application is vulnerable for a SQL injection? Here, when the values are submitted to these form fields, become a part of the SQL statement itself, which is very bad, then it gives rise to SQL injection. How bad it can be? It can be equally bad wherein just by knowing the username and without knowing the password, somebody can log in. How can it happen? Exploiting a SQL injection, can somebody log in using the username without knowing the password? Absolutely yes. So consider this scenario, what happens? Here, when the user ID, instead of user ID, he's not gonna put Srinivas. He's just gonna do a blank tick symbol here, which means it's gonna just close that user ID, it'll pick the topmost user ID from the stack. And he just injects or 1 equal to 1. So whatever you see on the image here, or 1 equal to 1 here is nothing but what statement it is. It's just a true statement. Or 1 equal to 1 will be always true. Is 1 equal to 1, it will be always true. And if or is appended to that actual SQL statement saying, hey, if user ID is something, or if 1 is equal to 1, and what they are doing here in the password field is, they are closing the password field, and they just comment out the rest of the field, wherein the actual password check itself will not happen. So this is a very, it might look little tricky, but that can be even more simpler SQL injection examples, which I'll try to send or you can refer somewhere. Basically, the message here is, when such SQL statements are injected as a part of the value of the form field, and if those SQL parameters, instead of just serving as the value for the web application, if they become a part of the query itself, and if they get executed, it simply means the user supplied value is no more a value. The user supplied value became a part of the backend code. Here in this case, backend SQL statement, and then the user can just control the SQL statement. He can just say where user ID is equal to, say, I'll just put it in a very simpler example for simpler representation. Say, for example, in this case, if user ID is gonna be Srinivas, and password equal to, here ideally the value should have been supplied as my password. Instead, by injecting something like a close symbol, this is a SQL statement closing of a value, or 1 equal to 1, and by commenting the rest of the statement, this password value, if it becomes the part of the password query statement itself, just think what will happen. It will become and password equal to, instead of checking the actual password, we close that and we say or 1 equal to 1. So it simply means if password equal to 1 equal to 1, is 1 equal to 1? Yes. And the rest of the checks we are commenting up. If these values becomes a part of the query itself, then it will be like where username is equal to Srinivas and the statement becomes a true statement. Then Srinivas will get logged in. I'm just writing it in this way because it's much more simpler to understand. So the message here is, if you play with the form parameters or any parameters, and if the value becomes a part of the query code itself, the query itself, and gets executed, then there is a problem. That is known as SQL injection. And one of the classic test string they'll use is 1 equal to 1 to understand whether is it working or not. So this is about very basic of SQL injection, wherein you can try tampering and checking, hey, this is just a simple logic. You have so many form fields, you can frame your own logics and you can try or anything like that. So apart from this, there are many other things in SQL injection known as blind SQL injection and so on, but these are the basics of SQL injection. The next thing we'll have a look at this cross-site scripting. What is this cross-site scripting? This is one of the most infamous attacks which do all nasty stuffs in today's world. I'll give you to set context, I'll give you an example. If you report one cross-site scripting to, say, Google. So a couple of months back, I remember somebody reported a cross-site scripting to Google. They pay you literally thousands of dollars. Like they paid, I believe, $10,000, which equates to like 7 lakhs, 7,30,000 rupees just for reporting one of these vulnerabilities. How and why this vulnerability exists? Let's take a very classical example. So we'll dig deep here, but this is the general flow. This cross-site scripting can give rise to something known as bypass of access controls, hijack sessions, disclose sensitive information, and so on. So for the example I gave you, wherein I sent an email to somebody and captured all their content, I actually exploited a cross-site scripting in that case. So this cross-site scripting is a very, very, very serious web application vulnerability. Let's see what happens. Say somebody is going to send me an email saying, hey, you have won here. And when I click that, if I'm being taken to a vulnerable website, and then if I'm gonna be redirected to saying welcome back, at that point in time, he could have planted a script when I click here, and that script would have been executed on that vulnerable website's context, and that vulnerable script resides on my computer. We'll see this in detail if this is the overall flow is complicated. I'll try to give a very simple way, much more simpler example. Say you visit a Facebook post. Somebody posted some message on Facebook, and say if that Facebook post was vulnerable for cross-site scripting. The very fact that you read that Facebook post, if the bad attacker had embedded some scripts on that Facebook post, the very fact that you saw that post, your complete Facebook account will get compromised. How? Because that script will get executed in your session context, in your cookie context, and the moment you saw that post, if that cross-site scripting had executed, the bad attacker would have stolen your cookies and would have logged it remotely, using which he can get into your Facebook account. Thankfully, at least for now, we know Facebook is not vulnerable for cross-site scripting, so we are good to go. Typically happens. This is the flow for a cross-site scripting vulnerability. This is a much more simpler example wherein consider there's a blog that you post a comment and that comment is read by a malicious actor posts a comment and that comment is read by a victim. Very similar to the Facebook example I gave you. Say a malicious actor is posting a comment with some malicious script. Script ... script contains some malicious script. Whatever you see here, that comment, whatever script the malicious guy has posted, under that comment is script window.location equal to attacker cookie document.cookie. This exact piece of code, if executed on a web browser, on a website, then a victim reads a comment on that post, will get executed and steal his cookie, just exactly like the Facebook example I gave you. It will steal the cookie and store it on the attacker's website. First, the malicious guy, the bad actor, posts that bad script into a comment. Next, as a part of 2, the victim, if you see here the victim's browser, the victim visits that latest comment, exactly as we refer to a Facebook post. Then number 3, after visiting that, whatever script the bad actor had injected on that comment got downloaded to the victim's web browser on the victim's machine, and it got executed on the victim's context. So here under victim's browser, now the bad comment which the attacker had injected got loaded. What does that comment do? The victim read the comment already. The comment, this JavaScript function document.cookie will steal the cookie from the victim's browser and send it to the attacker's server, which you see as step number 4. Just by the sequence of step 1, 2, 3, 4, the victim's session is compromised fully. Say if it's a bank account vulnerable, if it's a bank website vulnerable for a cross-site scripting, the bank account is compromised. A Facebook account vulnerable for cross-site scripting, Facebook account is compromised. If an email account is vulnerable for cross-site scripting, the email account itself gets compromised. So this is the overall flow which you see about cross-site scripting. So there are various types of cross-site scripting, like stored, reflected, DOM-based cross-site scripting. So we are not considering time. We are not getting into that. If you're further interested in this subject, dig types of cross-site scripting. That will definitely get you interested. There are like basically 3 types. They'll call it 4 types of cross-site scripting. The first one would be stored. Second one would be reflected. Third one would be DOM-based cross-site scripting. So basically, these are the 3 common things which they'll say. If you attend an interview or something, they'll strangely ask you, hey, is there a 4th type of cross-site scripting? Can there be one other type? Yes, there is, which is not very common. That is known as universal XSS. So what a universal XSS means, it's a very, very nasty vulnerability, which means the website is not vulnerable for cross-site scripting. Instead, the web browser itself is vulnerable for cross-site scripting. Consider Chrome itself being vulnerable for cross-site scripting. That is known as UXSS, universal XSS, which simply means any website which loads on that vulnerable web browser is vulnerable for cross-site scripting, though the web application itself is not vulnerable. That is universal cross-site scripting. So hardly there have been very few UXSS I can remember of, but that is also a type of cross-site scripting. But traditionally, they say there are 3 types of cross-site scripting. So these are the basics of XSS. If you are interested, dig more and learn about the other stuff. This is yet another vulnerability. We'll quickly finish with this vulnerability and take a tool demo because that's what can really get you started. So what is the CSRF? As the term says, it is a cross-site request forgery. I'll explain it with a simple example. If a website is vulnerable for a cross-site request forgery, let's take, for example, a bank website. A bank website is vulnerable for cross-site request forgery. You are logged into your bank. While you are logged into your bank, you click or visit some other website in some other tab, totally in another tab, while you are logged into your bank's website. When you are logged into another tab or you visit some other email or something, and you click a link, and that link is set by an attacker. That attacker, if he's able to literally transfer money out from your bank because you have just logged in into another tab, that can it happen actually? Yes, it can happen. That is cross-site request forgery. What happens here? Cross-site. In tab A, I'll just pull a tab and show you for better illustration. So say, so here is a tab and here is a tab. Say this, the second tab is the actual bank tab where I've logged in. And this tab is controlled by an attacker. You visited a website, name it tab 1 and tab 2. In tab 2, you are sitting on a legit website. In tab 1, you have visited an attacker's website. In tab 2, the legit website is bank.com. You are logged in. However, when you are on tab 1, which is the attacker's website, if the attacker is able to trigger a request to bank.com to transfer money to his own account, then it's very bad. If tab 2 website, which is bank.com website, is vulnerable for CSRF, cross-site request fraud, cross-site request forgery. Crossing two sites, if there can be requests sent to the server, then it's CSRF. So that cross-site request forgery is also a very infamous vulnerability, which can be taken care of in many ways. And all web applications should be secure for that. So basically, it's an attack that forces an end user to execute unwanted actions. In our example, what is the unwanted action? Transfer of money. Then it is CSRF. You will have a thought now saying, hey, what do you mean CSRF? Like, how can that ever happen? Is it even possible? Yes, because HTTP by itself, the protocol is a stateless protocol. The target server will not know whether the request which originates from your browser is originating from tab 1 or tab 2. As long as all valid cookies are presented and valid parameters are presented, the server will honor it. While you are logged into tab 2 from tab 1, if any request is sent to the same server, all the cookies associated of tab 2 will be sent to the server by default. That is how HTTP works, and that will contribute to CSRF. So this can be prevented in its own ways. Somebody can take a guess how this can be prevented. I have a question from somebody. How do we identify attacker's website? So that's a good question. How do we identify attacker's website? So you are talking about CSRF, cross-site request forgery. I'm logged into a bank. How do I know something is an attacker's website? Yes, that's very tricky. You practically cannot know whether a website is an attacker's website. Say while you are logged into SBI.com, you got an email which says, hey, I have some good coupon codes posted on this website, visit here. You're going to click it. Or if a friend sends you a WhatsApp message, you're going to click it. It's practically very difficult to understand attacker's website. So the mitigation here is not that we should understand it. Yes, it's good. If you are very vigilant enough to understand, oh, this is a malicious link, I'm not going to click it. It can be an attacker's website. Yes, it's very good. However, the website itself, here the bank.com itself should prevent. What is the prevention? The prevention here is not about identifying attacker's website. The prevention here is bank.com should prevent this attack, wherein in tab 1, if the attacker is trying to send something to bank.com, bank.com should not honor it. How can that be done? Any guess? Yes, that's an attack website. I visited. I don't have the capability or knowledge to understand that it's an attack website. So when we say attack website, it's a general website. When we say attack website, you don't have numbers like matrix, there are zeros and ones or anything. It can be as simple as a news website. So it is very difficult to understand the attack website. How can they prevent a CSRF? By using anti-CSRF tokens. What it means is when the legit website sends a request to bank.com from tab 2, if they are going to embed some secret tokens for every request, And if they are going to validate that secret tokens, to honor that request, me or the attacker on tab 1 can send the request to say, hey, transfer money from A to B of $1,000 or of like 1,000 rupees. However, the attacker on tab 1 will not be able to send that secret token. So for every request response, the bank.com should ensure that there are anti-CSRF tokens embedded, and that anti-CSRF token is validated before honoring. So the appropriate way to mitigate this is bank.com should take care of the vulnerability CSRF, and it's not the end user's responsibility to go identifying bad websites. Of course, it's a very good practice because it helps in elevating other issues like phishing and so on. However, the web application should be strong enough to withstand a CSRF attack, which means they should bake in anti-CSRF tokens. So thanks for that question. So definitely, yeah, the bank.com should take care of it. And as a very good practice, you can also try identifying malicious website so you can save yourself from other issues like other cybersecurity issues like phishing and so on. So this is about CSRF. These are just very basics. If you see, what did we see? SQL injection, cross-site scripting, a CSRF vulnerability. These are just super basic vulnerabilities. So now you can have a question to me saying, hey, okay, fine, you said something about like HTTP, cookies, parameters, bunch of vulnerabilities with which OWASP is presenting, couple of vulnerabilities, what they are, how they will impact everything. So what do I do here afterwards? How do I go about attacking? The plan is understand the business logic, what the website is meant to do, and what is the bad thing you can do on that. If a website is meant to give me a ticket, say for example, redbus.in, for 1,000 rupees from A to B, if I'm able to take the same ticket from A to B for 0 rupees, then it's a business logic flaw. How can I achieve it? Let's try understanding the parameters, the form fields, the anti-CSRF tokens, the SQL parameters which can or cannot be injected. And if you probe those things, basically, if you probe the HTTP request response, then you can figure out those things. Understanding business logic, the authentication used by the website, how sessions, authorizations are held, basically how data are validated and so on. So in a commercial industrial scale, how do they actually do this whole web app? How do they secure web applications? There is something known as SAST and DAST. What is SAST? We'll just, because we do need like time to go through the tool now, I'll very quickly run through. SAST is basically static application security testing. DAST is dynamic application security testing. SAST means, this is a term. If you are attending an interview, you can just throw these terms. I know SAST, I know DAST, and so on. SAST means you go through the source code and find vulnerabilities. Static. Source code is referred as static code, and you find vulnerabilities, it is SAST. DAST means you look at the application itself. You look at IRCTC, you look at Redbus, you look at the application itself, and then if you find vulnerabilities, then it contributes to DAST. So both can be done in manual and automated ways. DAST, manual, we use a web proxy and we do it, which we'll quickly see. There are automated ways, automated tools like AppScan, Zap, and so on. But I highly recommend don't start with automated tools because you lose the grip. It's a magical tool kind of thing. You throw, you get vulnerabilities. No, you should not use automated tools to find vulnerabilities on commercial websites. It's against their policies. So manual ways, the way they do it, we'll quickly see it. SAST, as I pointed out, is just manual code review. Say you say, I don't have patience to go through all these web application flows and find vulnerabilities, but you know, I'm a very good coder. I can code, I can read code and find vulnerabilities. Once you learn what vulnerabilities are, then if you see code, you will know, oh, in this code, if somebody is supplying a value in a form field, it's going to get executed on the database. So this line of code will contribute for SQL injection. That is manual code review. By doing a manual code review, you can find vulnerabilities. That they refer as SAST. There are commercial tools for that. It's just for industrial scale, but it's not to learn concepts. So recommendation would be not to go for these tools, better learn the manual way. So the hunt. So before coming for the hunt, we'll quickly see how this Burp Suite and everything works. So there's a tool by name Burp Suite. So this tool helps in finding and identifying vulnerabilities. So basically, this tool is not a magical tool or anything. So if you have your laptops, you can, if you are interested, you can just download this as we speak so that you can get started. So basically it's Burp Suite. The name is Burp Suite. And there is a free version and a commercial version. You can go for the free version. Commercial version is $399, but I will let you know what the commercial version does, but it's not a big deal. You can start with the free version. Any questions?
Sir, go a little bit slow, sir. We are opening the Burp Suite.
Okay, I'll just ping it in the chat. Sorry about that. So you can open this website and click Get Community. So the Community Edition is the free version. So you can download the latest version. You can click download and install this latest version. So once you download this, it will be just a file. You can download and install it. Once you download this file, it's just in exe, as you can see here. Once you download and install it, I mean, probably you can click, leave it for download. I just need to tell you something what this does. So basically what this does is, this will stand in between your browser. So since I've installed it already, I'm directly opening it. So this is the tool. Once you install it, you will see this tool actually. So this Burp Suite will stand as a proxy in between your browser. This is my web browser and the actual website. Consider right side is the actual website. So all the requests from the web browser will be sent via this Burp, and from this Burp, it will be sent to the website. Basically, in a nutshell, you are intercepting HTTP traffic which originates from the website. However, to do so, you have to configure your browser, you have to point your browser to this Burp Suite tool. Then only all the traffic will go here. So how do you point it? You have to set your proxy settings. You might be using any browser. In all versions of the browser, you can see a settings known as proxy, and you can configure that proxy. For example, I'm using Chrome. I can just search and I can set my proxy. So I'll just ping you something considering time. Because you have to point your browser to your Burp Suite which you just installed. So I'll just ping you a link which will show how to configure. So this pictorial representation, there is a procedure how to configure. Remember one thing, if you configure something, there will be something known as certificate errors. So in order to avoid that, you need to install a Burp certificate onto your browser. So to do that, what you need to do is, you need to install Burp certificate. So how to install Burp certificate in each of the web browser? So you can do this on mobile also, we are not covering that. If you install your Burp certificate, so I've just pinged you two links. One is how to configure, second, how to install. Everything has pictorial representation. Just for sake of time, I'm just like sending you the tutorial and the notes, which is pretty straightforward. If you have questions, you can reach out to me. Once you install that, you can point your Burp to, you can point your web browser to Burp. So let me just do and show. So I have already configured, and I'm going to just point my web browser to Burp. So I've installed a plugin which gets that job. I mean, if you follow the tutorial, you will be able to set it. So I'm just setting it directly. Say I'm just pointing all my traffic off the web browser to Burp, which if time permits, I'll do and show. Or the best thing would be, while we are talking, download Burp, install Burp, go through those two links. First, configure Burp via your configure Burp on your web browser using the first link. Seeing the second link, install the certificate. That second link will have instructions for Internet Explorer, Chrome, Firefox, Safari, whatnot. Whatever browser you're using, it will have instructions. Just follow those 5 or 3 steps and install certificate. Once you do those two, you will just be able to point. If you set your proxy settings to Burp, which means I'll show. When you see this burp, there are so many tabs. I'm going to just show to get started what are the tabs you should be seeing. Basically, couple of tabs. That's it. There is a tab by name proxy. The third tab, you will see this by name proxy. Under that proxy tab, after installing burp, there will be a tab by name options. In this tab, you can click, basically this will point to 8080, which is fine. You can leave it as is. Since I'm running something else on port 8080, I have changed it to 8089, but you can leave it as 8080 and you have to just put this tick mark. Once you do this, what simply it means is burp is running on, if you're already antivirus software, would there be an issue if using? There should not be any issue for the most part. But if your antivirus is asking you, can I allow burp access? You can safely click S. Burp is not a malicious software. You can just click S. If your antivirus is asking, can I allow burp? I mean, I'm just paraphrasing it. If it's going to ask like, hey, can I allow access to burp? Just click S. Or in some shape or form, for your antivirus to allow burp, you can configure it as required. So in burp, when you make this tick, as you read here, proxy listener, which means it is listening to this. The burp suite engine is running on the IP 127.0.0.1 on port 8089. When you install by default, it will run on port 8080. All you need to do now is configure your browser under network settings, which I've configured already, which you will see in that link, to burp. Now, since I've configured or pointed my browser to burp, there is under proxy tab, there is something known as intercept. There is something known as HTTP history. Just remember these two tabs. Under intercept, you will have a tab to toggle around saying intercept off, intercept on, intercept off, intercept on. Which, as the English word says, if you are setting intercept to on, all the traffic will get intercepted. If you get off, it will not be intercepted. Once the interception is set to on, and if a traffic is intercepted, let's see. I'll just visit a website here. Say, for example, nitt.edu, or I'll do webmail.nitt.edu. Now, in this web browser, I'm visiting this website, webmail.nitt.edu. Now, if I say intercept on, and then if I refresh, if you can see, this is the actual HTTP traffic. What happened in your browser when I clicked webmail.nitt.edu, this HTTP request, a GET request, is sent to webmail.nitt.edu. I'm not sure if it's too small. Can you see this? I hope you can see this. So basically,
yes, sir. Yes.
Okay,
yes.
cool, thanks. So basically a request, a GET request is sent. This is the underlying raw HTTP request, which is sent to webmail.nitt.edu when this website is visited. Now, if I have option, what options do I have? I can just tamper this. Whatever you see here is the HTTP header. I'll show a HTTP body also. So this is the HTTP header. You can tamper this. You can pass like as a value, you can pass, say set fetch site, I can pass like a SQL statement or 1 = 1, and I can play around. These are parameters, basically header parameters. You can play along like this, and you can forward or drop this request. If I say forward, the request is sent. You can keep playing like this. If you switch off the intercept, everything is gone. So you'll be like, hey, I don't know, every request is gone. All you need to do is just go to this HTTP history tab. Now, you can see all the requests which went through. All these are the requests which went through this proxy. I mean, basically, in order to load this website, so many requests were exchanged with the server, target webmail.nitt.edu server, and the response was fetched, and this response was sent back to this browser. So I see this nice little beautiful page. Now let's take this example. Say I'm typing my username, that my password is equal to, I don't know, or whatever it is. Now when I submit this, what happens? You see a post request. In this post request, I see hord_user is Nirmal and hord_password is I don't know. Of course, this is not my username and password, but I'm saying. So basically, these are form parameters, and this is the HTTP body. Between the HTTP, this is a post HTTP request. In a post HTTP request, there is something known as a header, and you have a line space, a /n, a line space after whatever you see is the HTTP body. Whatever you play around in this website, the parameters, the values, everything is passed on to the server like this. So when I forward this request is forwarded to the server. So in short, this whole Burp Suite sits as a proxy in between your web browser and the target server, allowing you to intercept the raw HTTP request, the underlying HTTP request, which is exchanged between your browser and the server when you navigate through any web page. So now, basically, you see all these things, and you can tamper with this website, which is not vulnerable. If this was vulnerable for SQL injection, basically, if I put Nirmal as a username, and if I do a closing code, and if I do or1 equal to 1, then I comment out rest of the SQL statement. If this was vulnerable for SQL injection, this will just load. Nirmal will get logged in. Thankfully, an IT website is not vulnerable for SQL injection, so it will not get logged in. So basically, the nutshell here is proxy. Burp is a proxy to intercept underlying HTTP request. So again, going back to our basics, if you understand what this request response is, what a vulnerability is, you will be able to tamper and find those vulnerabilities on web pages. Now you can have a very valid question. Can I go hitting every website and try finding everything? Obviously, no. There are some protocols and websites which are open for vulnerability analysis that you can find in a common portal known as HackerOne, hackerone.com. If you go to hackerone.com, companies would have submitted, hey, I have my website, please find vulnerabilities. You have to read the rules in hackerone.com, understand and play accordingly. Now you will have another question. Hey, before getting into all these Microsoft.com and other companies which are listed on HackerOne, how do I learn this? For that, you have some other demo applications on which you can play around, or demo vulnerable applications. For example, DVUA. So which means DVUA, which means damn vulnerable web application. So you can install this and host this on your local computer, and this web application you can host on your local computer. It's just a PHP application, and this application will have all the vulnerabilities. So you can learn to exploit those vulnerabilities, get an understanding, and then you can go hit other websites wherein you will be able to find the real vulnerability. So this is a very, we've tried to compress a whole subject in 1.5 hours. So if you do have questions, you can reach out or ping ma'am or like chat or anything. But I do understand time is 11:30. Do you have questions? I know I'm overshooting time here, so I want to stop sharp at 11:30. So do you have questions? I will be happy to take them, or any clarification you can chat or you can ask. Ma'am, it's Janet ma'am, it's 11:30, I believe. So I'll just open it.
Yes, Nirmal.
Yes, ma'am.
We will stop with this because you have given an explanation of the software, and maybe if needed, the participants can explore it from the website.
Correct.
Any questions? Please post in the chat or unmute yourself and you can ask.
Sir, good morning, sir. I have a question.
Yes, sure.
Sir, what is the basic difference between XSS and CSRF, sir? Like, I am not finding the difference.
Okay, in an XSS vulnerability, we'll go there. So XSS means cross-site scripting. Here in an XSS, an attacker will embed scripts on a website. Forget all the flow, forget all this diagram, everything. Just I'll further try to simplify it. Say, for example, you have Facebook. Probably you might have a Facebook profile. In your wall or in your own feeds, your Facebook post the right word. So in your Facebook post, you make a script and you post that. Say that script gets executed and becomes a part of the HTML code itself, which means tomorrow if I, being a victim, visit your Facebook wall and read your comment, but your comment is malicious, you injected a script there. If I just read that comment, you say you have just commented good morning and whatnot. I just read, hey, good morning. But the very fact that I read your comment, whatever script you had injected into that comment will get executed on my web browser. So if you had injected a script to steal cookies, you will get to steal my cookies and you can log into my Facebook. So basically it's script injection, cross-site scripting. But when it comes to CSRF, there's no script injection. There can be script injection to achieve CSRF, but for the most part, when it comes to CSRF, the logic is, I am an attacker, you open bank.com. I ping you a link on your, say, WhatsApp or anything, hey, can you visit this link? If your bank.com is open and if you're logged in, the very fact that you visited the link which I sent you, from that link, I will send a request to your bank because you are already logged into another tab. I will send a request asking, hey, bank, transfer so much money to my account. Since you are already logged in from another tab, and if the bank is vulnerable for CSRF, that request of transfer money from the logged in person will get executed. So that is a cross-site request forgery. When it comes to XSS, there is no cross-site business. It's on the same site. You inject scripts, which gets executed on an attacker's context. So that is cross-site scripting. CSRF is a little different, wherein a cross-site request is being sent. A request from attacker.com is sent to legitbank.com. A cross-site request is being sent, and that request is a forged request, so they call it cross-site request forgery.
Okay, sir. Thank you, sir.
Hey, no worries. So if there are any other questions, I'll just open chat. So kindly share your email address, Yashua. I'll just I'll forward the PPT contents to ma'am and I'll attach my email address there. So I'll just do it. I'll send it to ma'am and attach my email address on the last slide and send it to you folks. So as for the content, I'll just put my contact details on the last slide and send it.